right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us for another webinar. My name is Victor Verba. I'm a systems engineer over here at Variphy, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Today, we are joined by my friend Dan Schmidt, another systems engineer over here at Variphy. And for today's webinar, it's pretty exciting stuff. Dan's going to be taking us through some of the new Cisco Cube capabilities within Variphy, expected to be released in Q2. So if you haven't already, please make sure you register for our house party, March 17th. Great virtual event, nice roadmap, learn about upcoming releases, what's coming out, a little bit of Cube that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to take a deep dive into the product. So make sure you register for our house party. You can find that over at variphy.com/webinars. So let's go ahead and we're going to get started with just a quick intro. Verify about our agenda today. Quick intro is we're going to look at an overview of what Variphy does as a company. We'll jump into some live demo. Dan's going to kind of walk us through some of the system requirements, configurations, pricing, and then kind of take us through a little bit of a demo of what we're going to be able to do with some of the Cube and general setup information. We'll go ahead and answer some Q&A. And then at the end, we'll reward one lucky attendee with a $50 Amazon gift card. So just a quick overview of Variphy. Variphy is the preferred analytics solution for Cisco collaboration, housing anything from dashboards and wallboards, CDR analytics, UCCX reporting, remote phone control and text broadcasting, change management as built, as well as our DN and DID management packages. So just one more thing before we do get started, we are happy to announce that we do have offered our Ninja Enhanced Consulting Services, our NECS services. Those are really for a lot of our customers that really want to take a hands-off approach to Variphy and are looking to really just offboard the manual running of reports, updates of the system to a certified Variphy engineer. You'll work one-on-one with a Variphy engineer to make sure that all your reporting needs are met. And we'll be able to assist with all the heavy lifting and do all the hand-holding for you instead of you guys having to worry about it on your own. If you have any questions about our NECS package, feel free to reach out to your account manager, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions we have. So now we're going to go ahead and jump right into a live demo. If you have any questions during the demonstration, please make sure you're using the QA panel on the bottom right-hand corner. We'll address any questions that we can towards the end of the webinar. Anything that we're unable to get to, we'll be happy to reach out to you afterwards. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and pass you the ball, and let's go ahead and get going here.
Thank you, as always, Vic. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this week here. As Vic stated, we got an exciting topic here, brand new to Variphy, and this is going to be our Cube CDR processing. All right, so I'm going to cover just a few slides here before we start taking a look at the actual product, just to give everyone the foundational knowledge of what we're doing on the back end, how this all works, and then we'll show you in the application. So first questions asked, why Cube? How does that differ from what I'm currently doing with my CDR out of Call Manager? Are there any requirements? So that's what this first slide is going to be covering. And so we do realize, right, we see it all the time. Someone has a Call Manager and their PSTN point of egress really is a Cube or a Cisco Unified Border Element that traverses those calls over your SIP trunk. And while Cisco CDR does tell us that that's the device used to route the call, there are times where someone may have a Cube and are maybe not routing those calls to Call Manager. Maybe they're routing them to third-party SIP providers or a third-party contact center or IVR or a fax server, anything of the nature in that, right? A SIP call does not have to land in Call Manager. If it does, we will see it currently today in Cisco CDR, but for those times that maybe you want to provide analytics on calls that are not routing to Call Manager, so that would be everything else. You want to provide analytics for that. That's why we really decided to go down this path of ingesting Cube-based CDR in addition to CUCM based CDR. So for those of you that are not familiar with Cube CDR delivery, Cube and many other iOS gateways, if anyone's using CME still, all of them typically has 3 types of CDR accounting. One is called radius server, and this is basically an open UDP fashion type delivery of call data to a syslog server. The downside of this we see though is if radius server goes down, you have a loss of data. You can't retrieve that data. And same goes for syslog server. So those are 2 server applications residing on the Variphy box. But what we're going to be focusing on here initially is the file accounting method. Okay, file accounting method relies on FTP from the Cube to the Variphy server. So much like the call manager already does, it's going to deliver files in comma delimited format, and we are going to ingest those from the Variphy server. Okay, some iOS requirements for this file accounting to work. Nothing new here. This is all pretty old. iOS release 12.4 /20T or later. I think current is somewhere in the 15s, so definitely should not be an issue here. But if you're using iOS XE, minimum release to be having file accounting is 16.3.1 or later. Okay, so most of you will likely surpass this by a lot, but that is what Cisco publishes as iOS requirements for any of this to work. Okay, so I guess I would think all on this call has a Cube in their environment, but for those that don't here, it's just a small image, kind of a very, very high level network topology of how Cube works. Cube is a simple router gateway that sits on your network that interfaces with your SIP trunk. And that is what decides, the Cube decides where to route that call. It could have a SIP trunk into call manager. It could have a SIP trunk to a third-party fax server. It could have a SIP trunk to a third-party IVR, whatever the case may be. At the end, though, right, today, in most standard practices, you have phones that register up to your call manager, and that call manager registered over that SIP trunk to the Cube. So getting the data at its source is what this is all about, right? We don't necessarily have the requirement or dependency on call manager anymore. And so while the data sets between call manager and Cube are vastly different, we'll kind of go into some of those differences here later on. On the right side of this image, as always, right, you do have the option of having our current CDR databases co-res to the Variphy server or as an external database server that we can process into. So that does not change at all. Okay. All right, Cube configuration. On the left, just a brief image of how this file accounting starts to look. Okay, you have your Cube, and we'll go through the commands to set all this up on the Cube. But theoretically or high level, you have your Cube that stores calls into its own memory buffer. Okay, depending on configs of that iOS Cube, right, you could tell it how long to store data inside of its own buffer. So it's just holding in memory, and then once that trigger's hit, it goes out and writes. You could see it writes a primary FTP server source up to the Variphy box, and so it just appends data constantly to open files there. Cube, excuse me. Cube also does have the option to provision a secondary, either FTP source or its internal flash, right? So you could write records to internal flash, though not advised, right? But that is possible. And so all of this gets stored as a CSV file up into the internal memory buffer. And that internal memory buffer is defined anywhere from between 6 and 40 kilobytes. So every time a record is generated, it's going to write to this buffer, and that buffer is released either on a time period or a size period. So the size period is between 6 and 40 kilobytes. Okay. Cube will allow for a primary and secondary FTP server for us to write files to, and this is going to be in an HA model, so high availability model. So It will only write to one source at a time. So if you set your primary source as an FTP server, it will continue writing to that FTP server until that source goes down, in which case it'll utilize the secondary source indicated within the configuration. Okay, so if both servers, both FTP sources are down, there is a loss of data. We cannot retrieve that CDR data back, okay? Unless you are saving it to internal flash, then of course that can be written back. But if they are two FTP sources and those two sources go down, it's just gonna try to connect again at the next polling interval and continue to see if those servers are up or down, okay? That third bullet pretty much just repeats exactly what I said here. It's going to rely on the flush timer configuration setting. And so it will release calls on that flush timer config or when the memory buffer is full for whatever you configure it as between 60 and 40. Okay. Cube will close once a cube writes successfully to the FTP server. There's basically an open file on the FTP server, and Cube will continue writing and appending data to that file until it reaches a maximum file close time limit. The minimum setting for this allowance, unfortunately, is 60 minutes. So though we can write data every 1 minute to this file, it will not close the file for use until 60 minutes, okay? And then just as a following here, there's two modes of delivering file accounting data, and that's going to be in compact mode or detailed mode or method. And so we're going to talk a little bit about both of those here. The option, we will support both. The option is completely up to you, but we'll kind of cover the caveats of one or the other, okay? All right, so I know there's a lot of text on this, but this is basically straight off of Cisco's published articles about how to set up file accounting. Only thing that has really been changed is usernames, file prefixes, and the time or size limits that we think is most ideal. Okay, so I'm just kind of gonna go through here and talk about what each command is doing, just so you guys are aware, if you do implement this, what it's actually doing. You know, first two are, you know, evident. We know what that is. We're going into privilege mode and the global config mode. To enable file accounting, you're going to run gw-accounting-file. This is what triggers the file accounting delivery generation. Okay, and then second, you're going to say, well, where are we pointing this data to? Give me a source. And so we're saying primary FTP. So always try this one first and the IP address of the verify box where we're going to be having the FTP services running. And then the /cube1cdr. This is going to be the prefix of the file that's written to the FTP server. Username, verify, password, it could be anything. So username and password here, obviously, you can configure that as anything. If you decide to have a secondary FTP source as well, you would basically just repeat the same command, but instead of primary, you'd run secondary. This command illustrates the ability to run to the internal flash. So if the primary FTP source goes down, instead publish and write that data to Cube's internal flash. Same concept there, flash with a CDR test2 prefix. Okay. Next, we start getting into some of the minuscule settings to really get the best deliverance of data. Maximum retry count and a number. So this is going to retry your primary source number of times before it rolls over to your secondary source. So try my FTP server 3 times. And if it can't connect within those 3 times, then roll over to secondary source. Maximum buffer size in kilobytes. So this is going to, we talked about that internal memory buffer that holds that data. This is the size limit of that buffer before it releases that data and appends it to that open file on the FTP source. Okay, so in this case, we say keep the buffer to about 20 kilobytes. Okay, at 20 kilobytes, it's going to release and then keep ingesting new data into the buffer. Okay. Maximum file close timer minutes. This is the part where, although we don't like seeing this, right? Because I know Call Manager sends data every minute. That is not the possibility for Cube, unfortunately, unless you're using Radius or syslog. Then it's up to date with that, but there are some other caveats with that file format as well. So every 60 minutes, close down that file and create a new file. And you can see here that Cisco's minimum is 60 and maximum up to 1440, which is a day. So once a day, send or write a new file. In this case, we're going to go an hourly file. All right, maximum CDR flush timer in minutes. So this is kind of goes in line with the buffer size kilobytes, but this is by time. So it's going to be an or, whether it meets the buffer time of 1 minute or buffer size of 20 kilobytes, whichever comes first, okay? And then last but not least is our CDR format. Again, you know, if you're coding this on in your cube, you guys are deciding what format of data you're going with. Compact versus detailed. On the next slide, we'll go into the differences between the two, okay? And then last but not least, if you're going detailed here, we're saying to run it as, you know, it does give you the ability to provide your own custom templates. And so when we mention custom templates, this is VSAs, vendor specific attributes that you can put into a template. For us, we're just going to prefer that we get all possible vendor or VSA vendor specific attributes. So this is going to say ACCT-template call history-detail. That's going to give us everything for that call, okay? So our theory, it's best to have more than not enough, right? So this is the general, and then you're going to end the config and obviously write it to your memory. So this is the general config for file counting method, okay? All right, so cube file accounting, just kind of going over the summary of what we all talked about. It really comes down to 4 things. FTP data to the Variphy server designated by IP address. The way we see it is if you have multiple cubes that we are collecting data from, on our FTP server, you're likely going to want a separate account for each cube. And that separate account will have its own home directory. And so for each cube config, you're pointing to, you know, the IP address, which is obviously going to stay the same. But it's the username and password that's going to be changing between each cube. And that's what tells what directory to write those files to, okay? The other alternative that we have is to use a custom prefix name. So when you're saying, you know, 192.168.1.5 is my FTP server / and then the prefix of the file name, in our config, right, we will be indicating that file prefix as well. So, but just to be safe, we prefer that it's a one folder for one cube, so we know exactly where that data is going and where to find it, okay? Just kind of going back to what the last slide said, what all those configs actually are doing. Cube will buffer the call records and release files to the Variphy FTP server. With those examples that we had, or those values that we had, it's going to release data every 1 minute, or it's going to release all data in the buffer once it hits 20 KB, okay? If you have that time setting set to 1 minute, this should not happen. Right, you could get quite a bit of data. Just really depends on what your environment looks like, how many calls are traversing cube, but either or, it's going to release that call if it hits time or size limit. And then once that open file is on the FTP server, it will keep that file open for 60 minutes and append data to that open file. Okay, file formatting or naming convention is indicated here. So you got your in this case, cube1 CDR underscore. This is the prefix that you applied in the config for the files. Cube1 name is going to be the host name of the cube, and that's going to be auto-determined by the host name of the cube. And then the time format or the timestamp of when that file was written. So February 24th, you know, the month, day, year, time, milliseconds. Okay, and then what we will be doing is ingesting those files at a minimum of every 1 hour, because you know, right, that file is open, so we can't ingest an open file being actively written to. So we're thinking every 60 minutes for that, and we will be looking for other alternatives. Okay. All right, so compact versus detailed mode. Some caveats to compact mode. Variphy will support both, but if you only want compact and that's okay with you, just know, right, compact mode only has 23 fields of data in it. Very, very basic information, time of the call, the caller ID, the DN or the DNS as they call it, who people involved with the call, not people, numbers involved with the call, connect versus disconnect times, the disconnect cause code, very basic stats of packet information coming in and out. So you may ask, well, why isn't compact good enough? And it really comes down to what you're looking to get out of the data. In detailed mode, it takes an approach more of a feature or event-based logging. So if you want to track more specific QoS information or what features are being invoked on a call, and keep in mind this is Cube, so these are only PSTN-facing calls, right? You won't expect to see, inter-cluster, phone-to-phone calls being in Cube data because it doesn't need Cube. All the routing is done by call manager in this case. Okay, and a lot more on the detailed 130 fields to go through. All linked by a field called H323 conf ID. That's basically what allows us to create our sequence of events. Key note take here is they are no longer referred to as call records. They are going to be referred to as events, and I'll show you why here on the next slide. And we get more of the, I would say, monitoring type information, some more of your debugging and troubleshooting data, so your codec bytes and rate, alert times, your remote media addresses that are involved, fax relay information. So a lot more very specific troubleshooting type information versus just the basic CDR data. Okay. One thing I want to note here is you have to run detailed mode to get the VSAs, the vendor specific attributes, and this is what explicitly tells us what types of calls are going on through the cube. What we're going to show here an example is we have two-way calls. Two-way calls will produce multiple call legs, multiple events. I take it back. If a call forward all or call forward NA or any different type of transfers are invoked, you will see a record for each different event that's transpiring through the experience of the call. Okay, so it's very literal that we may have 30 call events under the same sequence. So that is the main difference and driver between Cube and CUCM CDR data. Okay, so let's talk very briefly about pricing and packaging. We have decided here at Variphy to do one low, affordable fixed cost per Cube device. So, right, we're ingesting data. There is no concept of devices. There's no concept of people. So that in an annual subscription mode. We will be releasing EFT of this sometime in May, and this is an estimate as of now. We got a long time before May hits, but when GA becomes available, everything that you have today for call manager-based data, you will expect in Cube-based data. That's call history, reporting and scheduling, alerting, dashboards, and setting cluster permissions or restricted visibility. All right, so that's enough for the slides here. I know we're running quick on time very quickly, but so let me jump right into the differences data-wise between what we have in call manager versus what we have in Cube-based data. So what we're seeing now is normal call manager data. As we all know, call manager data will put a lot of what you need to know in one single call record, unless there are multiple transfers involved. Then you'll layer up multiple call legs. But if there's any sort of redirects or forwards or two-way call, just a normal call, everything's contained within one leg. Okay, this is going to be vastly different from Cube data, and so we had to change things up to process Cube data in file accounting method. In file accounting method, like I said, everything is given to us as an event. Okay, so if I scroll over to my my search criteria here real quick, now I'm just searching for all calls, but just like the CDR data, you can very well layer up, hey, show me calls from this phone number or presented to this DNS. Again, it's PSTN facing, so many times you will just have the full 10-digit DID as the DNS. And so as I scroll down here, this is what we see, right? Again, it's presenting in an event. On every single call that Cube processes, it's creating at least 2 events, okay? So we've got a basic drill down option here now. So we're gonna show you what matches your search criteria, but every event is linked by this H323 conf ID. So we drill that down, we see that the H323 conf IDs are the same. We get some idea of sequence, but not all the time for call ID. So the H323 call origin really tells us, gives us some clues as to what is happening. Like, why are we seeing two events with this? Okay. Now, if I scroll over to the right, this is a two-way call. There we go. If I scroll to the right, I have columns that say, well, what feature describes this call? It's a two-way call, and here's where you would see call for it all, blind transfer, consultative transfer, things like that. What feature was invoked with that call? To make matters worse or more complex, based off of what this feature ID 1 reads, all these other feature IDs mean something different. I know two-way calls means this is the caller ID, this is the DNS, this is the leg ID. So I could see that based off of the leg ID, 6916 comes before 6917. So if I scroll back over, I know that my call origin, the answer, comes before the originate. And this is a very confusing concept. It was for me for the longest time, but you have to think of it as from the cube's perspective, what is this leg describing? So in this sense, right, this second leg is actually happening before this first one. The answer happens before the originate because the cube answered the call from the PSTN, and then it's originating, or what they say is terminating this call to wherever it needs to go. So it's an in and out basically. And so this is saying, well, it's originating from this 214.266.000 number, and notice that it's actually an E164 format. The cube recognized it with a +1, right? So based off of dial peers and routing rules, whatever's coded in the cube, it's saying, oh, I'm actually terminating this call. I'm stripping the +1, and I'm actually just routing it to 866.896.5900. As I scroll to the right, there is so much information in here, a lot that's semi-useful, a lot that's probably of no use whatsoever. But what our key takeaways here, is basically this feature, right? We want to know if there's multiple origin records, right? This next example I think I have down here, it's 3 legs, but oh wait, there's 2 originate records. Well, why would Cube do that? And it goes into specifics as to why. If I scroll all the way to the right, there's internal error codes, like SIP internal error codes that it'll tell us, which you could Google what the meaning of those internal error codes are. And what I've seen from the data is anytime that there's an internal error code, it basically either is a SIP timeout that wherever the call is going to did not retrieve that call on the first attempt. So it will continue on a second attempt, and that explains the 2 originate records. So call comes in over answer, it tries on 1 originate, it gets an internal error code, and then tries again, okay? And I could tell that this is a failed call. No time, no talk time, no remote media address, et cetera, et cetera. So I know this is a very, very high level intro to Cube data, but I wanted to let everyone know, yeah, this is definitely coming down the line, May timeframe. We do plan on having a subsequent Cube session to get into more specifics and more details. But I know we are short on time. Vic, real quick, do we have any questions that I could assist with at this point?
Hey, Dan, yeah, we got quite a few questions out here, so we'll do our best to kind of get to everybody. Understanding there are definitely some time restrictions. Rob had asked, is this SIP only, or will TDM records be captured also? So I'm not sure if you want to answer that, Dan, or if you want me to answer that.
Sorry, so can you repeat the question? Is SIP calls and TDM calls?
Yeah, is this SIP only, or will TDM records be captured as well?
Yeah. So my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding is Cube is going to, handle your SIP calls. So unless you have other interfaces, old legacy, circuitry coming into Cube, then it may. But my understanding is that it should just be SIP.
All right, thank you. Another one that we have over here is, does the file accounting include SIP errors? That's from AJ.
Yep. So yeah, if, I think at the very end of that, there's SIP internal error codes that it will log. Though we'll, pretty much have to go Google that error. It's a string of digits. Google what that error says, and it'll say, 1xxx timeout or destination, not available, whatever. But yeah, it'll error those error codes.
Okay, excellent. And we do have a bunch of questions, and I do have all your questions, so we'll go ahead and reach out to you after this in the interest of time. Let's go ahead and keep us moving here, and we want to get to what everybody's here for, besides learning a little bit more about Q, is the winner of our $50 Amazon gift card is Rodney Harmon. Congratulations, Rodney. We'll go ahead and reach out to you after the presentation here and make sure that you get your gift card. If you guys have any other questions, we again appreciate everybody's time. Feel free to go ahead and send them to us in the chat panel over there. We'll make sure we do the best to be able to get back to everybody that we possibly can and with answers to your questions. Thank you again for all your time. Dan, excellent job as always. I really appreciate everybody's time here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, all.